Hi again, everybody. I want to talk in this lecture some more about what we're calling the Homeric World, or the Homerverse. In the last lecture, I was talking about what kind of place when we're in the Homeric world, what kind of place we're in at a moral level. And I was arguing and pointing out something fairly obvious, but I think certainly worth underlining, which is that when we are in the Homeric world, we are in a morally quite a horrible place. A place where violent men do terrible things to each other and to their others, to people who are different from them, certainly to women, to children, to the people they enslave. So this world of these men who are referred to as heroes in Homer, they are certainly not heroic by our lights, and it's a world, as I was saying last time, that and we want to be very frank about this. There is absolutely no point in kind of blinking at this or covering it over. It is a world of self-interest, of selfishness, of power, of urges, which Odysseus and his fellow warriors really make very little effort to control for the most part. Rather, they follow their urges, revel in their urges, savor their urges even, as in the famous episode of Odysseus and the Sirens. And as I was arguing last time, the one exception to this rule of the immoral or amoral Homeric world, or at least one might say a pathway toward an exception, is the one that is offered by that law of hospitality, or xenia. And as I was saying last time, this seems to connect in quite a powerful way, actually, I think, to our ruling theme in this course of recognition. Xenia, as I was saying last time, becomes a mechanism or a system for recognition in which it becomes possible for the stranger to reveal himself, the stranger to become known, and in that way moral bonds are created, which offer, I think, the possibility of some kind of moral renewal of this world that we're looking at. In this lecture, I want to continue talking about the nature of the Homeric world, but under a couple of different headings, in a couple of different registers, three of them, actually. I want to talk a little bit about what kind of religious or spiritual world we are in when we are in the Homeric world. I want to talk about the cultural nature of the Homeric world, and by cultural I mean ethnic, linguistic, everything having to do with our belonging to one culture rather than another. And finally, and I think perhaps most interestingly, although it may seem really boring when I introduce it, I want to talk about the geographical space that is imagined in the Homeric world. So, what kind of place is this? Under those headings, what shape does it have? What structure? What hierarchy? And I want to get into it by, first of all, introducing as a kind of comparison and a baseline, and I think it's the inevitable one, but worth getting clear about. A comparison or baseline can be achieved for this kind of discussion just by asking first, okay, what kind of world are we in? If we look around and reflect upon the shape of the world as we experience and assume it, and project it and represent it, well, what do we see? And I think we probably can generalize, and it's maybe a bit of a cliche, but I think it's a useful one. We probably can generalize that our world, this world of 21st century Canada, etc., that we inhabit, ours is a world, I think, that is very much dominated by and organized, let's say, by a concept of difference. So culturally, for example, we live in the awareness and the assumption that there's many different kinds of ways to be in this life, in this world, different languages to speak, different places to live, different foods to eat, different sexualities to pursue, and so on. We tend to think that way, I think, even in terms of the way we think about our own corner of the world, Canada, but even more so when we look out of the world as a whole. We think of it, I think, as, and in a totally normal way, this is what I want to emphasize, we tend to think of it as a great kind of cornucopia of cultural difference. Geographically, and again, this sounds like a kind of totally boring point, but in the end, I don't think it will be one. Geographically, again, I mean, we're exceedingly accustomed to the notion that out there in the world, to put it very kind of crudely and even childishly, out there in the world, there's all kinds of different places, and they are radically different. So it would not strike us as shocking to have as a project of your life to travel from, you know, this rainforest that we live in to the Sahara Desert, or to the pueblos of Southwest America, or to the North Pole. We think of the world geographically, again, as dominated by, organized by, very, very powerful concepts of difference. And again, the point is precisely that when we say that, it sounds like we're saying nothing, okay? That's a completely normative assumption that we have for the way the world works. Now, I said when I started this a few moments ago, I want to look at the Homeric world under three headings today: the cultural, the geographical, and the religious or spiritual. And I'll just add that one in to our kind of comparative baseline. What world are we in here today in 21st century Canada? You can see exactly what I'm going to do under this last heading. Again, under the spiritual or religious heading, we live in a world that is exceedingly diverse, in which concepts of difference, assumptions of difference are normal, are almost inescapable. So religiously or spiritually, we live and walk in the assumption and the awareness that lots of people don't really have that aspect of their lives, don't really believe in beings other than human beings, and we're just fine with that. Among people who do think of themselves as having a commitment to a religion, I think we're going to be able to generalize in terms of most of the major faith traditions that we'd be able to identify, and we can't get into a whole kind of comparative religion thing here, but I think we'd be able to generalize that people who do have faith or believe in beings other than human beings in our world are going to think of those other beings as radically, radically different from themselves, from human beings, right? So we think, if we think in terms of gods or divinities, we think of them in terms of higher powers. That's the kind of standard metaphor that we use. If we believe in gods and divinities, they are radically above us, radically beyond us, really at an entirely different level of existence. So, to wrap up the opening generalization, where are we when we're in our world? Well, again, whether it's culturally, geographically, or spiritually, we are in a world that is exceedingly diverse, dominated by normal concepts of difference. And that's where we can begin to draw, I think, an informative and I hope an interesting contrast with the Homeric world, or what I've called the Homerverse. And we can start to draw this contrast on that last category that I was talking about, which is the category of the religious or the spiritual. And I'm not going to work with the text closely under this heading. I'm just going to talk about it. We've already talked about this a fair bit in previous lectures, and as we have noted, The Homeric world, first of all, is absolutely full of gods under the ancient Greek pagan conception, in which every city has its god, every tree has its god, every river has its god, and so on. And as we have also discussed, the Greek pagan conception of divinity is that these beings are certainly not human. They are above and apart from the level of human being. They are extremely powerful, the Greek gods, and of course they are immortal. So they're certainly above and beyond to that extent. Certainly another level of being as far as that goes. And this level of being that the Homeric world obviously is fascinated by, and even to some extent obsessed with. And yet, if we situate ourselves within the perspective of Homer's characters, if we can try to do that for a moment, if we imagine ourselves kind of standing on the platform of the Homerverse and looking up from the Mediterranean world of Homer's so-called heroes up at the gods, what do we see when we, in the Homeric world, look up at the world of the gods? Well, basically, we see the Homeric world looking back at us. It looks very much, the world of the gods, that is, looks very much like a kind of better, brighter, larger, more powerful copy of the Homeric world itself. The very opening of the Odyssey, in the first couple of hundred lines, as you guys will recall, first of all gives us the god Poseidon feasting among the Ethiopians, and Homer then very quickly gives us a scene of Zeus and Athena and the other Olympian gods having their own feast in a kind of after-dinner quarrel up on Mount Olympus. We need to recall, whenever Homer's so-called heroes, whenever they stop and they sacrifice some animals, one of the things they always do is they'll pour out a libation to the gods, and they will burn the thigh bones for the gods. The idea there of that particular Greek ritual procedure, the idea actually is that you're giving that part of the meal to the god. So it's as though Poseidon, if you're sacrificing to him, it's as though Poseidon, if he likes the smell of those thigh bones that you're burning, he'll actually come and join your feast. You may or may not see him, but he's there. Anyway, when we are in Homer's world, traveling around the Mediterranean from place to place, with Odysseus and his companions, what do we basically find when we go from place to place? Well, we find palaces with rulers and other heroes feasting and drinking wine and eating bread and telling stories. What do we see when we look up at the divine level of the Homeric world? Well, basically we see exactly the same kind of thing. We see palaces with powerful gods who look like rulers or heroes or whatever, feasting, drinking wine, and telling stories. And as I've just said, that's precisely why you sacrifice to the gods when you're having one of your sheep barbecues in Homer's world. The idea is they need a place at the table. They like that stuff too. Meanwhile, and as we have already discussed, there's a great deal of what we can call intercourse between gods and humans in Homer's world. Intercourse in all senses of that word, in the sense, of course, of communication, of interaction, Athena swooping down to intervene, Hermes swooping down to intervene, Poseidon just being so pissed off at Odysseus that he makes him wander home for 10 years, and so on, and intercourse up to and including sexual relations between gods and humans, which is a very, very important aspect of the Greek mythological tradition, as you guys will know. In the Odyssey alone, Odysseus himself has two very long-term relations with divine or semi-divine being, and of course there almost would be no Greek myth without the innumerable stories of Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, etc., having sexual relations and children with human women. So, where are we then under this first heading of the Homerverse for this lecture, the question of its religious or sacred structure? We are in a world in which, again, there is this other level of being, this level of divinity above the human one. There are gods up there. They are above us. They are more powerful than us. In that sense, they are on a level, another level from us. And yet, we Homeric people, we members of the Homerverse, when we look up at those gods, they actually look a lot like us. Another version of the Homeric world looking back at us. So it's as if, if the world of the Odyssey were a kind of video game, the gods perhaps would be the players of the video game, but the world they're in their house where they're playing that game, it's just a larger version of the world of the Odyssey itself. And now I'd like to go on and talk about another of my three headings, and that's the geographical heading. How is the world of the Odyssey, the Homeric world, organized in that way? Well, obviously, when we are reading the Odyssey, we are reading a story of a journey. I mean, that's so obvious that word Odyssey has become a synonym, a kind of poetic synonym for a long journey. And most of what we watch, most of what we are looking at when we're reading the Odyssey is Odysseus and his companions and associates moving, traveling from place to place. So from the very beginning of the poem, we have Telemachus, for example, leaving Ithaca, traveling to Pylos and Sparta. We later on hear from Odysseus about all of his misadventures after leaving Troy at the end of the Trojan War. And we see many other travel stories, such as the story of Menelaus traveling to Egypt. And the ultimate example, of course, which I want to come back to in a moment, the ultimate example of Homeric travel, of course, is the episode in Book 11 when Odysseus and his companions actually travel to the land of the dead. And again, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So they're always moving, getting on their ships, crossing the water, coming to another place. When they come to another place, what do they find in the world of the Odyssey? Well, basically, they find a beach. Near the beach, there's a house or a palace or a town. In the house or the palace or the town, they end up having a feast. That's basically what happens over and over and over again. Where were they before they got in their ship and traveled to that beach, palace, feast? Well, basically, and for the most part, they were on a beach where there was a house or a palace or a town, and they were having a feast. We cross great distances in the world of the Odyssey, and we do this over and over again, back and forth across the Mediterranean. But when we get to where we are going in the world of the Odyssey, it is in most cases much the same kind of place as it was in terms of where we were. These are familiar landscapes, always familiar landscapes that they come to, and it's a sense of landscape as familiar. Never landscape or a place they come to which is, strange or bizarre or unfathomable. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, of course, and I'm going to come back to those later on. The argument I'm going to make is that the exceptions actually prove the rule, but in any case, for the moment, the rule is, again, traveling from one corner of the Mediterranean Homeric world to another, but finding the corner you travel to looking much like the corner that you left. And I just want to look actually at two examples to try to make this point. One will be from the end of Book 5. This is where Odysseus is disastrously shipwrecked. All his men are dead. It's just him now. He manages desperately just to make it to the beach of this place that he has come to in the midst of a horrible storm. He has no idea where he is, and yet he knows exactly how to get around in this unknown place where he is. I'm not going to read all of this, but the episode that I have in mind is at the end of book 5, from around line 451. And there's actually a very, very nice, interesting little episode there when Odysseus is desperately swimming with his last breaths toward this beach that he sees. He sees there's a river that comes down to this beach, and he immediately does something very interesting, which is he prays to the river god. Because every river has a god in the Homeric world. The point I'm making for the moment being, Odysseus knows exactly what to do there. He's like, okay, I know this kind of scene. I know this. This is beach with river. What do I do? Okay, I pray to the river god. And in fact, that works. The river god hears him and helps him make it to the beach. And then I will read the very end of book 5 from around line 475. Odysseus makes it to the beach. He's lying by this river. Night is coming on. He's like, oh my God, what should I do? Do I try to stay by this river overnight? I'll freeze to death. Or there's some woods over there. Should I go in there? Maybe. There might be wild beasts. He decides to go into the woods, and book 5 ends with what is actually a very, very famous passage and image in Homer, which I'm going to read. So he decided to go into the woods. He found a place beside a clearing near the water's edge. He crawled beneath 2 bushes grown together of olive and thorn. No strong wet wind could blow through them. No shining sunbeam ever strike them. No rain could penetrate them. They were growing so thickly intertwined. Odysseus crept under, and he scraped a bed together of leaves. There were enough to cover 2 against the worst of winter. Seeing this, the hero who had suffered for so long was happy. He lay down inside and heaped more leaves on top. As when a man who lives out on a lonely farm that has no neighbors buries a glowing torch inside black embers to save the seed of fire and keep a source, so was Odysseus, concealed in leaves. Athena poured down sleep to shut his eyes so all his painful weariness could end. Book 5, this conclusion for the moment of Odysseus's horrendous misadventures, it ends with this remarkable image, and very carefully constructed image, of the hero making himself cozy, finding these trees which grow very thickly intertwined, finding this big bed of leaves. He's like, oh great, I know how to use this. He piles them all on top of himself and tucks himself in, and we get a wonderful simile there, a wonderful image of how it's just like when a farmer conserves an ember on a torch by burying it in ashes. Odysseus comes to this strange shore at the end of book 5 under disastrous circumstances, but again, and this is the point that I'm making, it is exactly the kind of place that he knows. It is a landscape he's never seen before, but he knows exactly how to make his way around in this landscape, how to save himself, how to make himself cozy, because the kind of landscape that it is just the same kind of landscape that he finds everywhere he goes in the Mediterranean. And a second little example that I'll give just before I move on to the Land of the Dead episode, which I want to spend a few minutes on. But just before we go there, in book 13, as you guys will know, Odysseus finally makes it back to Ithaca. He's actually, he's deposited there asleep, in fact, by the Phaeacians who take him there in their ship. So Odysseus wakes up kind of wondrously and is on Ithaca. He doesn't recognize it. Not because it's in any way, odd or exotic, the landscape that surrounds him on Ithaca. Rather, he doesn't recognize it because it just looks like everywhere else. That seems to be the sense. He wakes up beside a beach, there's a harbor, there's a tree, there's some hills. He's like, oh my gosh, here I go again. Another place. It's just another place. And in fact, Athena has to come along and tell him that he is on Ithaca. Now, granted, he's been away for 20 years, but still, you would think when you come home by that token, you would know by the shape of the beach, by that special tree, by a smell, by whatever. Odysseus doesn't know that he's home when he arrives in Ithaca, and the point I'm making is that's because Ithaca, again, it's just like those other places, really, that he tends to go to in his wanderings. So I'm building up a picture here, as perhaps is already obvious. I'm building up a picture here of the Homeric world, according to which it tends to lack that defining characteristic of our world that I laid down as that baseline, that comparative baseline for our discussion today. If our world is dominated by a concept of difference, which we're constantly encountering and constantly aware of, the Homeric world is dominated by a concept of sameness. That's what we see when we look up to the gods. We just see the Homeric world looking back. That's also what we see when we travel from one bit of Homer's Mediterranean to another. We just find another version of the same bit we are in. Sameness, not difference. That's what dominates the Homerverse. And the ultimate example of this, and I think a very wonderful and fascinating one, is of course going to be in Book 11, when Odysseus and his companions actually travel to the land of the dead. Circe tells them they have to go there if they're to have any hope of getting back to Ithaca safely. They have to travel to the land of the dead, the land of Hades, and they have to meet our friend Tiresias, and Tiresias has to give them a prophecy. Elsewhere, actually, in the Greek and larger pagan epic tradition, even elsewhere in Homer, there is a conception of the land of the dead as the underworld. In other words, it is often thought of as being physically under the earth. And so you'll find episodes where you kind of, you make your way down to the underworld, kind of like you're caving or something. It's an especially deep cave, and if you go deep enough, you find yourself in the land of Hades. That's not actually how it works in the Odyssey. How does Odysseus get to the land of the dead? Well, he gets there in exactly the same way as he gets everywhere else, right? He gets in his boat and he sails there. It doesn't even really seem to take that long. So we're at the beginning of Book 11, if we could just turn to that. Circe, again, has told them they have to go to the land of the dead. They have actually groaned and cried about that because it sounds absolutely horrible. But then Book 11, from the very beginning, Homer says, we reached the sea, so this is Odysseus talking. We reached the sea, and first of all we launched the ship into the sparkling salty water, set up the mast and sails, and brought the sheep on board with us. The sheep, very important. We were still grieving, weeping in floods of tears, but beautiful dread Circe, the goddess who can speak in human tongues, sent us a wind to fill our sails, fair wind befriending us behind the dark blue prow. We made our tackle shipshape, then sat down. The wind and pilot guided straight our course. The sun set. It was dark in all directions. We reached the limits of deep-flowing ocean, where the Cimmerians live and have their city. Their land is covered up in mist and cloud. The shining sun god never looks on them with his bright beams, etc. Destructive night blankets the world for all poor mortals there. And they are there. They just arrived at the land of the dead. That journey goes like that. And all of a sudden, they are there. The conception that Homer seems to be using here, and actually we have some very useful little maps at the beginning of our course edition which explain this better than I can. But the conception Homer seems to be using there is that the world is kind of the Mediterranean, really, and the lands surrounding the Mediterranean. Surrounding all of that is a great kind of ever-flowing river, which is called the River of Ocean. And the idea seems to be that Odysseus and his companions, in sailing to the land of the dead, they're exiting the Mediterranean Ocean, they're crossing this so-called ocean river, or River of Ocean, and then they're there. You arrive at the land of the dead. But the point, again, for current purposes, is you just sail there, just the same as you get everywhere else. It doesn't even take that long. Moreover, there are actually people, mortal people, who live there, or at least near there. These people called the Cimmerians, about whom we learn nothing more. But the point, again, is, you know, even at the land of the dead, there's actually mortal people who have that as their part of the world that they hang out in, like people who live next to the dump or something. You know, it's not the best, but it's all we got. But this remarkable familiarity, ordinariness even, of traveling to the place where dead people live. And of course, the fact is that in the Odyssey, dead people really do have a kind of life. And you guys can already see the point that I'm going to make about this. When the Homeric perspective looks at the land of the dead, basically it sees a version of the Homeric perspective. Now, true, everybody's dead, and that's kind of different. But nonetheless, we are in a familiar version of the Homerverse when we are in the land of the dead, rather than a strange or freaky one. Homer even seems to think, as I said, of the dead as kind of having their own ongoing life in this Hades world out there beyond the river of ocean, almost as a kind of simultaneous existence with the mortal timeline running along with it. So one thing that happens when Odysseus goes to the land of the dead, and he meets all these spirits whom he calls to him with a sacrifice, they want news of what's going on in the other world, because the other world is proceeding along without them. They're proceeding along in their own dead world, but again, it's like two timelines proceeding simultaneously. That's how Homer seems to think about it. And I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking directly at the text. I'm just going to make a couple of points about what happens in this amazing Book 11 Underworld or Land of the Dead episode. Obviously, they meet all these ghosts, spirits. The very first spirit they meet is of a guy called Elpenor, who was one of Odysseus's men. And we actually just saw him die in Book 10. He drank too much. He woke up on the roof of Circe's palace. He fell off and broke his neck. Not a very heroic death in Homeric terms. He just died. Odysseus and his men come to the land of the dead. There's Elpenor. And he asks them to go back and bury his corpse so he won't be dishonored. The point being, again, they just left that guy, and now here he is, traveling to the land of the dead, is just traveling to a version of their own lives on this kind of simultaneous timeline. I mean, Odysseus meets his own mother in the land of the dead. And again, it's not that hard to get there. So it's as though there's a tremendous access, actually, between the living world and the dead world. Another really fascinating thing that happens in this episode in Book 11 is, of course, that Odysseus meets a bunch of his former companions from the Trojan War who have died, obviously. And I do want to focus on a couple of these episodes because they are both very entertaining and rather funny, actually. So the first one I want to look at is going to be in Book 11 from around line 542, which is where Odysseus meets the ghost of a guy called Ajax. Now, Ajax was one, obviously, of Odysseus's fellow Greeks at the Siege of Troy. And there's an episode in that story, which Homer tells in the Iliad, and it's a famous episode in Greek myth, in which Odysseus really pisses Ajax off, by winning Achilles' armor. Basically, the details of the story aren't too important for us. What is important for us is that Odysseus meets Ajax here in this Book 11 episode in the land of the dead. Last time he saw Ajax, Ajax was really cross with him. And in the land of the dead, Ajax still cross about what happened. So Book 11 from line 542, Odysseus says, "Other dead souls were gathering, all sad. Each told the story of his sorrow. Only Ajax kept back, enraged because I won Achilles' armor when the case was judged beside the ships. The hero's mother, Thetis, and sons of Troy and Pallas gave the arms to me. I wish I had not won this contest. For those arms Ajax lies beneath the earth, whose looks and deeds were best of all the Greeks after Achilles, son of Peleus. I spoke to him to try to make it up. Please, Ajax, son of mighty Telamon, can you not set aside your rage at me about those cursed arms, not even now in death? The gods made them to ruin us. You were our tower. What a loss you were. We Greeks were struck by grief when you were gone. We mourned as long for you as for Achilles. Blame nobody but Zeus. He ruined us in hatred for the army of the Greeks, and that was why he brought this doom on you. But listen now, my lord, subdue your anger." He did not answer. He went off and followed the spirits of the dead to Erebus. Even in death, Ajax is still steamed at Odysseus. That's how much difference dying makes to that Homeric hero and his Homeric values. It makes none whatsoever. Again, it's just another kind of corner, another portion of the same old Homer verse. The other episode, which is worth focusing on here, is, of course, Odysseus's meeting with Achilles. And this is a little bit earlier from around line 500 around line 475, I guess. I'm not going to read this because it'll take too long. But I do want to say what happens because it's a very interesting episode, I think. Odysseus meets the ghost of Achilles. He's very happy to see Achilles. And he says to him basically, wow, Achilles, this must be great for you being dead. Because I bet everybody looks up to you here and, you're kind of the biggest guy on the block. And Achilles gives this very, very interesting answer, which I will read, actually. It's Book 11, line 489. Achilles says, "Odysseus, you must not comfort me for death. I would prefer to be a workman, hired by a poor man on a peasant farm, than rule as king of all the dead." A very famous response that Achilles gives to Odysseus. And it's especially interesting for our purposes because it sounds like Achilles is kind of rejecting or repudiating the heroic values of the Homeric world, saying, I'd rather be a workman, not even a farmer. I'd rather be a workman hired by a farmer in life than be Achilles here among the land of the dead. That sounds like a kind of radically un-Homeric notion, if you see what I mean. But then something very interesting happens as Odysseus and Achilles talk further. Achilles asks Odysseus for news. As I've said, the dead do that a lot in this Book 11 episode. He asks Achilles for news of the world above, specifically for news of his son called Neoptolemus. Hey, so Achilles asks Odysseus, he says, hey, so after I died at Troy, how did my kid do? Because he was going to come and join the battle. How was he? And Odysseus says, oh, he was great. He was so tough, so awesome, never flinched, never complained, killed lots and lots of people. He was an awesome hero. And at that account, Homer writes, this is around line 538, Odysseus says, after I had told him this, Achilles' ghost took great swift-footed strides across the fields of Asphodel, delighted to have heard about the glorious prowess of his son. So even though Achilles himself is a little bit kind of bummed out in the underworld, in a very un-Homeric way, if you see what I mean, What he really wants to hear about is the exploits of his son, Neoptolemus. Odysseus tells him that Neoptolemus behaved like the perfect, vicious, ruthless, destructive Homeric warrior, and Achilles is like, yes! Strides away proudly across the fields of asphodel. The point being that those Homeric values live on, so to speak, in the land of the dead. And again, it's just another version, just another corner of the Homerverse. So, the theme and the point of this lecture has been the sameness, the uniformity, even the monotony of the Homerverse. Always the same kind of place, always the same kind of activity, always the same kind of Homeric, so-called heroic values. And I just want to add a little fun fact on to this pile of ideas, which has to do actually with the nature of the Mediterranean Sea. It so happens that because of various meteorological and geographical conditions, the Mediterranean, it seems, is almost tideless. So there are tides, of course, on the Mediterranean, but they're measured in centimeters rather than the huge tides of meters that we have, for example, here on the West Coast. So there's a number of moments in the Odyssey when Odysseus and his companions arrive at a new place, a new beach. It's always a beach. They arrive at a new beach. They run their ship up onto the sand. They have their regular meal of grilled meat and wine and bread, and then they lie down to sleep next to the waves. It's one of those repeated phrases that you get in Homer. And so we lay down next to the wine-dark sea, that kind of thing. As a West Coast person, if you read a Pacific Ocean kind of person, you read that and you're like, oh, guys, you're going to wake up with the tide sweeping you out. You can't lie down right next to the water like that. It seems that in the Mediterranean world, for real, you can, because the tides are so very, very minimal. Anyway, the point I want to make out of that fun fact is, again, that it is a world just of tremendous, largely unshifting sameness. And even the geography of the Mediterranean supports that picture. Now, as I said at the beginning of this lecture about Homeric sameness, there is an exception or set of exceptions to this rule. But I want to conclude this lecture by arguing that these are exceptions that prove the rule of Homeric sameness. The exceptions that I want to talk about now to wrap up have to do, of course, with Odysseus's adventures or misadventures after he leaves Troy, these disastrous episodes that lead to the death of all his men under very horrible circumstances. His men die because the places they come to are different, and because they come to some different places. That actually is what Poseidon has condemned them to do, if you like. To find their way into these exceptions to the rule of Greek sameness that dominates the Homerverse. So let's recall and review the kinds of not, I won't even say people, the kinds of creatures or beings that destroy Odysseus's men. First of all, we can think about the Cyclops, that race of one-eyed giants, and the very, very unhospitable Cyclops Polyphemus, who eats Odysseus's men 2 at a time until that horrible episode where they blind him and manage to escape. In a closely related episode, Odysseus and his men come to the land of those people called the Laestrygonians. They again are giants. They again are creatures who really enjoy snatching up human beings and popping them in their mouths, even skewering them like fish, as Homer writes in their harbor. The episode of the Lotus Eaters, where people aren't heroic at all. They just kind of lie around enjoying this drug that they have. Even the Sirens, who try to lure Odysseus and his men onto their beach so they can kill and eat them. They are not the same. They are different and radically different. But here's the thing. In the Homerverse of sameness, Greeks and beaches and heroes and feasting and Homeric values. In the Homerverse of sameness, sure, difference is sometimes encountered, but precisely when difference is encountered, it is encountered as monstrous. And this is the only way in which the different can be thought about or understood in Homer's world. Precisely if and when difference occurs, if and when difference is encountered in this world, it is terrifying, it is horrendous, it is the worst thing there can be. It's men getting snatched up and eaten alive by horrible monsters. That's the only way in Homer that we can understand difference. So let me wrap up in the last 2 minutes or so. Again, by comparison to our baseline, the way we tend to think about the way the world works, we take difference for granted. It does not strike us as in any way strange or upsetting that there should be diversity of culture, diversity of geography, even diversity of being in terms of how divinity is thought about. We take difference for granted. The Homeric world is different in exactly that respect. The Homeric world is one that struggles to understand or have a place for a notion of difference, such that the only place it can give difference is that place of the monstrous, the horrendous, the terrifying, men getting eaten alive. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now. I've been arguing here again for the Homerverse as a place of radical, almost unrelenting sameness. And I think that's pretty strange and pretty interesting. It's that observation of sameness in the Homeric world, ultimately, in terms of our look at Homer on this course, ultimately that is going to feed back in to the problem of recognition in Homer. But I won't get to that until the very last lecture for this part of our course. Next time, and in tutorial, I want to talk about sameness and difference in terms of Homeric narrative, how the story actually works. But for now, I'm going to stop there. Okay, thank you.